The talk on the Dalet, we were talking about the Dalet was the heart of the matter. And I saw within the, in my thinking and pondering the way the alphabet letters work, that the Dalet itself is kind of like the heart of the entire alphabet. In the sense that if aleph being a prefix saying I will, and bet is this container of being put into form, and gimel is that which is transporting or carrying what's it carrying. And that each letter in sequence is in reference to the one that came before it and the one that came after it. So the gimel was carrying the Dalet. If there was a treasure in the kingdom of Hashemayim, the heavens, of Yahweh's kingdom, what would that treasure be? And so we have Yeshua talking about a parable about there was a man who was rooting around out in the field and he found a treasure. And he realized that this treasure was so valuable that he actually went back, sold everything he had to buy that field so that he could secure the treasure. There was another one, the pearl of great price, which is a very similar story. So you could say, if there was a treasure, literally, in the kingdom of heaven, what do you suppose that might be? In which case also, if there was such a thing, since Yeshua talked about it, it should be in here, because if the alphabetic letters refer to everything that's of Yahweh's business and of Yahweh's concerns that he gave to us to regard, and if he talks about a treasure, then it should be in there. There's a few different words for treasures. If in some of this, I'm trying to show you how to go about studying these things. So I'm not just trying to give you a bunch of answers, but I'm just trying to helpfully hope people kind of walk through this process. When Brad Scott was in town a few years ago, he had a, I think it was like a lexicon keyed to the Septuagint, and he had dictionaries, and he had the interlinear and things written. It's like all these books, and so, you know, a friend of mine went and got a few books, and it cost a few $100s. And it was like, how do you use this stuff? And Brad Scott, you know, goes around the country and teaching people things, but he said that perhaps only 5 people out of 100 will even take any effort towards doing anything about what they hear. You know, plenty of people want to just come and listen, maybe be entertained, maybe, you know, but how many people will actually take it upon themselves to put some effort? 5 out of 100, maybe not even that many. So the point of this is to say, if somebody wants to, I remember one time at this other congregation, the guy said, well, why should anybody learn Hebrew? And there was the notion that says, well, if this is the language that when Yeshua comes back, or maybe which you're speaking for eternity in heaven, it's like, well, you're going to be speaking it, you might as well learn it now. And it's like, and I remember thinking at the time, well, if that's the case, I'll just wait until he just downloads it in my brain. Why should I put the effort towards it now? I mean, this is quite a struggle. I mean, if he's going to make all things new, it's like, hey, stick it in my head. But I see this as being quite a treasure. And I see this as being worth the effort. Now, you might say, you know, one man's junk is another man's treasure, and so what I may value, somebody else might think is just like, yeah, well, whatever. You know, I can't put my burden or I can't put my interest on anybody else, but I'm just trying to hopefully kind of show or explain or share or give some sort of esteem or help you see some maybe regard as to why I consider it valuable. So to look at the word treasure in Strong's Concordance, if you look there in the English word treasure, it'll show you all the times that word's used. Of course, it's keyed to the King James, and I happen to grow up studying the King James as a kid, so I have a little bit of an advantage there. I don't use the King James at all now, other than to key it to the Strong's. But at least I know, so I have many verses kind of familiar to me in my mind, and if I think of a certain subject, I might think, now how is that phrased in King James, and I can look up that word, and I might find it. So, for example, for treasure in King James, there's mem, tet, mem, vav, nun, which means basically a secreted valuable. Well, it doesn't tell you what the treasure is. It just says the concept of a treasure is a secreted valuable. Then there's Mem, Somic, Kaf, Noon, Hey, which is a magazine or a storehouse of valuables. And let me show you something interesting. Remember, we're talking about a magazine or a storehouse of valuables. Let me show you something about this word. And again, this is to show you a mechanism of how to process deciphering, decoding, decrypting, translating the words that are written in Hebrew into not just English, but comprehensional pictures. See, for me to say, oh, I don't trust the translations, and meanwhile I'm sitting here showing you how to take Hebrew letters and turn them back into English, that's translation, right? So the word camouflage and the word for Targum, Ethrog is all translation. But translation is taking a concept that you can't do anything with and making it useful or palatable or something that you can appreciate or something that maybe can even functionally benefit you if you use it, but perhaps functionally benefit you by playing into Yahweh's personal desires for you personally. In other words, if somebody says, hey, well, you should do what Yahweh desires, what pleases him. If somebody just says it's man's duty, obligation, position, responsibility, man's gifted place to be the creature that he made, which can bring him pleasure, which can fulfill his desires. How would you know what those desires are? And I could open it up and get into a whole other discussion about saying, how do you know what Yahweh's desire is? Well, one way that I've been trying to process stuff is to simply look at the word that's spelled desire, which is chet, pei, zadi, chafat. That's the word desire. You could say, so what? That's like spelling cat, C-A-T. But that's English, so what? In Hebrew, it might make all the difference. To you, to him. If that's the word for desire, chafatzi, with a yod at the end, basically is my desire. So if Yahweh's speaking and he says my desire, that's chafatzi. So you could sit there and say, well, if you look up pei zadi, pei is a mouth, and zadi is a sprout, or literally, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means to open the mouth. And then if you look up in the dictionary under het pei and take that concept, which I'm not sure if I have it written down here at the moment. Well, I could look it up. But the point is, you look up the sections of the letters. This is basically the way I've been doing. So if you have a three-letter word, it's pretty simple. You got all three letters as a word. You've got pei zadi as a word. You've got het pei as a word. But then you can look at other letters. And after next week, we're going to have a week on after the Zion just talking about how to use the dictionary, and I'll get into this. I'm saying it a little bit now just to show you. If you put an aleph in front of it as a prefix, or a bet, or a hey, sometimes a vav, or a yod, or a nun, or a mem, or a lamed, or a tav, all these works individual letters as prefixes. Or you could stick vavs and yods in between the letters, because the vavs and the yods, remember I said they work real close together, they're almost like wild cards. If you play in poker and you have a certain hand and you stick a wild card in, it strengthens the hand you have, but it doesn't necessarily change it, unless it's all wild cards, but basically if you look all through the dictionary, you'll find if you interject vavs and yods in between the different letters, it kind of strengthens it, kind of gives it a little bit of a twist, but it doesn't change the root of the word. And I had to learn that by process of use of going through the dictionary. So if you're looking for the word het pei zadi, for example, and you only find a little bit, look at het yod pei zadi, or het vav pei zadi, or het pei yod zadi, or het pei vav zadi, and then put these other prefixes in front of it, And you'll find other words. So to do the same thing with Yeshua, Shin Ayin, you look at Hey Shin Ayin, Mem Shin Ayin, Nun Shin Ayin, Lamed Shin Ayin. You look at all the words that could possibly be prefixes with a Shin Ayin in them, and you'll get these different nuances of salvation. And it's just a matter of taking the time to do it. And so this particular dictionary is not online, but the problem that I don't use a computer at all, but the problem with being online that I can see is that you zero in on exactly the word. You punch up e-sword and it throws you right to the verse. And you can see before it and back and you can scroll, but when you're looking at paper, as your eye is scanning over, your brain is picking up the information of these sequential orders, and all of a sudden something will jump out at you, just boom, you see this word and you go, oh, what's that? And then you look at a related word, another related word, and it shows you that, and it's like while you're searching, you're gathering up all this other information, which you just don't do on the computer. And so that's why I like doing the book. And plus, the whole thing about the paleo, even though, like I said in the last thing, if you look at seethesound.net, you can get the paleo letters to put on your computer. The reason I do them all by hand is that because people who have studied the human mind and the hand, there's a very distinct connection. As a matter of fact, there's a whole other tangent subject, but this guy, the Miru organization, Stan Tenen, he was saying that the way the studies are is that if you could close your eyes and what you can picture and you extend with your hand, there's this, your hand is the outward expression of your inner state of consciousness. And it's very similar to the Bet drawing where you have the mind going on, what's going on in the invisible world of your consciousness extending out through your hand. And the connection between the mind and the hand is so completely there that if you're playing music and you practice these things and you're writing letters and you're forcing yourself to draw the shapes, you're establishing things other than just getting the information down on paper. So what I'm trying to say is that the mind and the hand are so directly connected that if you force yourself to write these letters and to make the shapes on paper, you will learn in a completely different way than if you don't do it. And if you only use the keyboards and push your fingers on the dots of the letters, though it's convenient for a certain type of study, I would encourage you to go back to writing. The word for write in Hebrew actually is to carve or to etch. And the word, as we talked last week, the word for graphic is to draw or to scratch into things, you know, scratching into pottery or scratching onto the metal plates of the books they found in Jordan. And anyway, it does something to you. And if you want to conform your consciousness to Yahweh's consciousness, and he gave us these letters, then we can either sit here and with our mind try to grasp it, but because the shapes of the letters mean what the letters mean, and the shapes of these letters have an elegant form, they're not encumbered with other weird stuff. It's not like if you draw like an old English letter A, you might have a skinny part and then a thicker part, and then you might have curly cues on it, and it's not encumbered. The aleph, as we said, is just 3 lines determine a plane in geometry, and from a single point, you have a line drawn off into eternity. You call is it a vertex or a vector? Excuse me. You draw 2 vectors, and you've now like isolated this side of the eternal space from that side, but as soon as you draw a 3rd line across, you've now isolated this zone as a finite space compared to all other eternity of the eternal space. 3 lines determine the smallest or the easiest way to draw a designated zone. So just by looking at the aleph as being these 3 lines, you're saying the eternal one, who has no limit, Ein Sof is the word without limit, has determined to place this limited space, which is his place where he can be apprehended, or he can be considered, or he can be pondered or thought about or observed. If the one who has no limit is trying to be observed, well, you can't observe something which is so big, but he created the human capacity in the mind and in the heart to contain or connect with what he chose to reveal about himself and his purpose. So here you go back to the letter, the Vav shape as we had earlier, and the Paleo Vav is like this goblet, or like the train connector, and here you have, it's almost like this ball joint. I just got my car wheel fixed the other day, and this ball joint fits in the socket. It's like this shoulder joint, and this piece of metal rotates within there. So he created man to have the capacity to receive, to comprehend, and to work around everything that he determined to insert or to project of his own finited determination. Finited meaning he's the omnipotent one and he chose to make something finite, so I'm playing with words here. He finited some aspect of his revelation of himself and made it fit exactly to engage the capacity that he equipped the human being with. So mankind then is a completely unique creature on the face of the earth compared to all the other animals. And people who love animals, not to take anything away from that, and some animals are really intelligent, but he created man distinctly other, distinctly set apart. So the word desire has to do with an open mouth in a het, which is a container. Just for what it's worth, I'm going to look up het pay here real quick so we can finish with that concept. If anybody's looking at it, it's page 227. Het pay is the tooth of a key. It also means pure and innocent. Het pay aleph, now certain letters you can add as a suffix. So an aleph doesn't necessarily always change things. Aleph is a silent letter, but it seems like, well, this is like the original plan. But if you add an aleph to het pay, it means to do something secretly or something covered, or done something secretly. Het pay hay is also to cover, like this camouflage. So you could say het pay aleph or het pay hay literally means the revealed power, which is to say the useful tooth of the key is now secreted, is now hidden. It's like, why would he hide the tooth of the key that has an effect? You could say like the modern keys have a whole bunch of teeth on them, but maybe like one of the old skeleton keys only had 1 or 2 teeth. Well, if you take off the key that does any work and you hide it, it's like, well, it doesn't do anybody any good. Why would he do such a thing? And why would this word for het pay have to do with a desire, a tooth of a key? The het pay hay also means a covering, a canopy. It's where we got the, anybody heard of the word huppah? Does that sound familiar? It's the bridal canopy. It's the covering. Covered by gunfire, covering, upholstered seat. So you might look at, say, well, what does that got to do with his desire? The covering or the secret of the mouth being open, that's his desire? What do you do with those two concepts? You could say, well, a huppah is a bridal canopy, which is a covered, which is a secret place that he has an intimate relationship with. So it's not for everybody. It's for his bridal relationship, and it has to do with the mouth being open, his desire. You could put those together and you could construe then that says, if you want to have that kind of a relationship with Yod He Vav He, you better regard what came out of his mouth when it opened. And so what came out of his mouth when it opened? All this stuff here. To go back to what I was going to say about the word for a magazine or a storehouse of valuables is mem, samik, kaf, nun, hey. Ma, sukna. Mem, again, means the place of or away from. It can mean the opposite, which is to say not there anymore. Or it can mean the place where something happens. And does anybody recognize this word sukkah? Samic kaf. It literally means like thatched camouflage. It's a temporary dwelling, the festival of Sukkot. And I know some people stays in hotels and campers and all, but literally it means to build temporary dwellings that are camouflaged with sticks. And then Nun Hey is, you might say, the life revealed, the place where the camouflaged activity of the life imparted is expressed. But in the dictionary it says it's a magazine or storehouse of valuables. It's also where we get the word mask, mem samic hey. It's also, I said the word kaf mem vav, camo means camouflage, but also mem samic kaf, these first three letters, means camouflaged. But the whole word means, mem samic kaf nun hey means the magazine or the storehouse of valuables, like a depository. And you could say, well, why would you camouflage the depository? Well, if you don't want it to get ripped off, if you don't want it to get invaded, if it's for exclusive use, like the bridal canopy, so the ketubah is what you write when you're getting married. The chuppah is the bridal canopy. What I'm saying is that part of this searching and processing these words, even though I'm not reading you words from a particular verse, I'm trying to show you the mechanism of making these connections. Vaving, you might say. I'm trying to show you how to vav, how to connect, how to fit this into that and say, well, wait a minute, it sounds like something else. So I said before, back I think with the Aleph, about the Crazy 8 game. Remember that? Kids play this game with the deck of cards, played Crazy 8s. So if somebody throws down, say, a 4 of diamonds, the next person can lay down either a 4 or a diamond, or if they don't have a 4 or a diamond, they draw cards until they find one, they end up get a big stack of cards, and the idea is to get rid of your cards. Or if you wanted to change the suit, you throw down an 8. So it's called Crazy 8s. It's just a little game. But the thing about this related to Hebrew is that when you start looking at these words and you're going, mem samik kaf, well, that's camo. That's camouflage. Well, kaf mem vav, that's also camouflage. And it has to do with mem samik kaf hey, which is a mask. Well, gee, a mask is a camouflage. Well, that sounds something like the word panim, which is faces, like the table of showbread is panim. And so when I was doing the Aleph talk, I was trying to show you how everything was in this swarm of concepts, and that any one of them, you could just say, well, hey, that one relates to that, and that relates to that, and that relates to that, and that relates to that. It's like, hey, this guy's all over the place. And it's like, it was on purpose to show that this thing is like this swarm, like the electrons around a nucleus of an atom. It's a swarm. And you can choose which ones you're going to connect to at any point. When you connect the dots, as it were, jumping from 4 diamonds to say, well, 4 clubs, 4 spades. Well, wait, spades, I could do king of spades. Yeah, you could also do 9 of spades. 9 of spades, I could also do 9 of hearts. You're jumping, you're making the connections. And so when Abraham was told to go out and sephir the stars, I'm going off in this tangent here, again, just like what he was doing, to sephir is samik, pei, resh. Sephir. Well, samik is like the menorah, which is like this engineered structure, which is like the trellis. It was also lines up with the 4th day that he put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, which are like the principalities, the sun that ruled the day, the moon that ruled the night, and then you've got the 7 mazarot, the constellational houses, and those have jurisdictions, you might say. They're in the sky per month, and they change. So they're almost like these principalities that rule the sky each month. And so there's this concept of ruling, of establishing a frontier. Pei resh, Pei is a mouth, resh is an exalted man. So you could say, well, here's the established words, the established authority, the established declarations of the particular leader. What is the voice in the stars? That's kind of the sephir of the stars. Peresh is where we get the word Peru Uruvu, which is to go forth and multiply. P-R-U, Peru, is Peresh with a vav, which is where you get the word to go forth and to flourish. And then you get the country named Peru, which is actually a Hebrew word, which is this, it flourished. It's also the place where there is a place called Ophir there, which is known for gold, which is why the conquistadors went there. And so you think, well, wait a minute, are the names of some of these Spanish countries, are they Hebrew? Or Brazil is the word for iron in Hebrew. Bet Resh Zayin Lamed. So what I'm saying is that you make these connections, like all of a sudden you get this picture of the history of the world, which is different than we've ever heard before. And part of the value of going on this treasure hunt is that suddenly things start looking different. We were told a certain history of the Americas, North and South America. The more you start looking into it, there's a lot of stuff that they missed, and a lot of stuff they lied about, and a lot of stuff they told us to make us think one thing when we should have been thinking another. And when you find out what really happened, you go, hey, wait a minute, I don't like that. It's like, uh-oh, now we got a problem child on our hands, and now they're going to have to somehow contain you. And it gets into this whole picture. Who is this they, and why are they doing this? That's another bigger story. But all these things, I believe, address those matters. And if you go back to Jeremiah, which I don't know if we'll get a chance to get to, you read the book of Jeremiah. I just read that again the last 2 days. You start in the beginning of Jeremiah. Read it slowly and read the whole thing through. You think, oh, what a chore. Read it like somebody telling you a bedtime story. They're just read it. Don't try to intellectualize it. You read it through. And then go back and read it through again. Maybe try to read it as fast as you can just to catch the high points. And then go back and say, I'm going to look for the vavs. I'm going to look for the factors that are say, if this happens, then that'll happen. Or this is going to happen because you guys did that, or because you didn't do this other thing. And all of a sudden, you'll read the book like a whole different story. To go back to the treasure, Aleph Vav Zadi Resh can mean a depository or an armory, something you might want to hide. Gimel Nun Zion, to store in a coffer or a treasury or a protective hedge. Well, Gimel Nun Zion, I'm going to sefer some dots here. Gimel Nun is the word gan, which is garden. Garden, they got Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, and an angel, a seraphim with a flaming sword was put at the door, right? Well, that's Gimel Nun Zion. Zion is a weapon. So a picture of the Garden of Eden with a angel with a weapon with a flaming sword at the gate looks like Gimel Nun Zion, and literally means to store in a coffer or a treasury. Well, it's like the Garden of Eden was a treasured place. And it's like, okay, now you're starting to understand. You could read the word ganaz and say, oh, well, that's just, the English word is treasury. But when you put the pictures together, it's like, suddenly you get the Garden of Eden with the angel with a flaming sword at the door. It's like, what happened there? They had something very valuable that they lost. You go, lost treasure, that sounds like pirates. Oh, there's a word that's spelled Peresh Yod Zadi, I believe it is, peritz. And peritzim would be plural. It's like, hey, that almost sounds like pirates. And it literally means ruthless, vicious, aggressive destroyers that Yahweh said to his people, I gave you my best treasure. And because you guys didn't want it, because you didn't like it, because you profaned it, dropped it, kicked it, spit on it, and I'm going to take it away from you, and I'm going to call in the piratzim. I'm going to call in the pirates to come in, and they don't know what to do with it, but they're going to rip it apart and destroy it and run off with it. And you guys can have it back later on if you want to. Who? When? That generation died. Samik Gimel Lamed Hay, Sagala, to shut away wealth, a peculiar treasure. Sagla. Well, it makes me think of a movie star name, which is Segal. It's Samik Gimel Lamed Hay. Samik Gimel Lamed is the treasure. Samik Gimel Lamed Hay, Sagala, is that which is shut away. And you could say, well, Segal is a treasure, but it's like, wait a minute, Samik, this is the engineered structure of the Gimel Lamed. And if you look at Gimel Lamed, it's like, wait a minute, we talked about that at the Gimel letter. It's like a boomerang, right? The Gimel is a boomerang, and the Lamed is authority, like a shepherd's hoof, a shepherd's staff. And if you put the two together, they form this wheel, kind of like almost like the yin-yang symbol, where this thing rolls. And what goes around comes around. And if you look at all the words that are Gimel Lamed in there, it's like this thing reversing, coming back around. And just for what it's worth, I looked at the word for revelation, and so I had to get another dictionary, which was this one that had English word, looked at the word for revelation, and it's spelled Hey Tav Gimel Lamed Vav Tav. Well, I know that Vav Tav is a plural ending, though it's not necessarily, but here's Tav Gimel Lamed. And Hey basically means the, but not always. That's what I'm saying. You have to look at these words and kind of pick them apart. But there's Tav Gimel Lamed, Tagal. Gimel Lamed is this idea of the revolving door. It goes that way and it comes back around. It's where you get the word galut, which was the dispersed, where Yahweh said he's going to kick Israel out, but he's going to call them back. We've got all these other pages and words that I don't know we'll have time to get into, but the concepts are, Yahweh says, because your forefathers blew it and didn't want the covenant, I kicked them out, dispersed them across the face of the earth, and at the end of days, at the later days, I'm going to call for Ephraim, call for my people. Judah already got a chance to come back. Daniel figured that one out after 70 years, and they went back to Jerusalem. Then the diaspora, which is a secondary thing, was another matter. But where's Ephraim, the 10 tribes? Yahweh says he's going to call them back. This picture of the Gimel Lamed is the returning. So to have this in the book of Revelation, it's called the Revelation of Yeshua, but the word revelation is hataglot, which really means the returning. So this is the revelation of the returning of Yeshua, and it says right there in the letters with the Gimel Lamed. So if you look at this treasure as being the Sagal, it's the engineered structure of how to get the treasure back. Get the treasure back? He's going to reveal the structure of how to get the treasure back. It has to do with the menorah, the samach. I'm trying to show you how to do the severing process. And it's like Yeshua said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. That's a picture of the menorah. That's a picture of the samach. And he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. In a branch that does not bear fruit, we will cut it off. My father's the husbandman, right? I'm going to cut off the branch and throw it into the fire. But the branches that were the natural branches, that were bad branches, they're going to be cut off and thrown into the fire, he's actually going to graft on other branches. But I believe it's Paul that goes on to talk about saying, listen, if he's going to deal this way with the natural branches, if they don't bear proper fruit, he's going to cut them off and throw them. What do you think he's going to do with the unnatural, wild branches that he grafts in? Do you think he's going to say, don't worry about it? Don't worry about bearing fruit. Don't worry about doing anything I said to do. There's another verse in Jeremiah. Again, I've got all these things written down, but I'd have to locate exactly the spot. He said, the people of Israel had done wickedly. They had gotten each other into a form of slavery financially. Bondsmen, bondswomen, they'd sold their lives away. And so he sent the prophet, and the prophet came and said, you guys ought not to be doing this. And they said, all right, we'll repent. And so they let all the people go. And Yahweh said, gosh, this is great. I love this. This is my desire. The way you're treating each other, letting each other go from having each other in the bondage of this financial slavery, I love this. And then all of a sudden, they said, hey, wait a minute. It's kind of like Pharaoh saying, we let the Israelites go, but wait a minute. We can't do anything now. We don't want to work. And our country said, let's go get them. And so they went chasing back after him. So it says the people, the leaders, went back after letting them go. They went back and they grabbed them again and they put them back. It's like as soon as you get out of debt, paying off your credit cards or whatever, if they just relieve you, then the first thing they want to do is enslave you again. And Yahweh said, all right, that's it. I'm calling in the adversaries. But you can say, well, this isn't just Yahweh calling in the adversaries. And I could show you again and again and again all through Jeremiah. That's what I'm trying to tell you to look for it, is the Vav. He's saying, this is not Yahweh being a mean guy doing it to us. He said, this is your own ways coming back on your head. And so in trying to look at this Vav and saying, what is he telling us about the Vav? He says, your ways are going to come back on your head. That's the yoke. It's also the treasure. But let me show you how this works. So here's this Vav. And he says, picture some scales, which is also a form of a yoke. And Yeshua said, they said, what's the greatest commandment? He says, love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, soul, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all the law and the prophets. So figure if this is the law, and this is all the prophets, or this is the Torah, and this is the word Nevi'im. This is where you get Tanakh, right? The Old Testament, Torah, Nevi'im, Keterim, Tanakh. It's an acronym. So he says, the two great commandments is loving Yahweh with all your heart, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all the law and the prophets. So this here is basically a Vav, though it's not written like that. It's a Vav concept of these scales, right? This is the attaching these two. There's another verse, I think it's in Isaiah, he said, you guys have broken the yoke, you've cut the straps. Well, if you think, well, breaking your yoke is the crossbeam that goes over you by which you carry, the buckets. But he says you've cut the straps. If you cut off the law and cut off the prophets who are telling you about how to love Yahweh your Elohim, how to love your neighbor as yourself, the law and the prophets are only about loving Yahweh and loving your neighbor. They're not other stuff. It's not extra laws. If Yahweh says, love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, all your strength, all your might. V'kol lavivka, v'kol nafsheka, v'kol me'odeka. Giving you some Hebrew so you get the words in your ears. Love your neighbor and yourself. But he says, you guys have cut the straps. If you cut off the law and you cut off the prophets, and the prophet's job was to tell you what would happen to you if you didn't keep the law. If you keep the law, you get blessed. If you don't keep the law, you get cursed. You cut those off and you say, oh, we got a pretty light yoke. Gee, who has said everything in the Old Testament doesn't matter? We've got a light yoke. Our yoke is easy. There is no law. There is no words from the prophets. He says you've broken the yoke. There's another place, I think it's Jeremiah 35, he says, you guys want there to be no law? I'm paraphrasing here. He says, okay, fine, there's no law. You are free and at liberty. The law says, Yahweh says, I'm your Elohim and you're my people. I will protect you and cover you, and you guys are my responsibility, like the bondsman. And if you say there is no law, fine, I'm not going to cover you, and now you are free to have your enemies come in and tear you apart and ravage you. Listening to the Christian radio station the other day, and the Christian radio host was talking to a guy who was talking about the Sabbath day. And the guy was making a comment about the Sabbath day, and the Christian radio host said, just a minute. The Ten Commandments have nothing to do with the Christian covenant. Nothing. It's a different covenant for a different people of a different era. Whatever the Jews want to do with it. But there is nothing to do with the Christian covenant. And the guy was arguing, and I thought, well, boy, he's saying it pretty clearly. So as I've said before, I'm not trying to bash Christianity, nor am I making comment about Judaism. I'm trying to look back at these letters and say, what did Yahweh say? And so if the Christian church says there's no law, fine. Don't worry about it. But if Yahweh says, my law is, here's the way the yoke works. Whatever you do in terms of loving Yahweh's Torah is how Yahweh's going to love you. And if you disregard his Torah, he disregards you. Pretty simple equation. It's all up to you. If you mistreat your neighbor your enemies are going to mistreat you. But if you, running out of colors here, if you bless your neighbor and do them kindness and mercy, zadika and mishpat, as he said to Abraham, what's going to happen to you? You get blessed with zadika and mishpat. The yoke is simply this. It's all what you do to yourself. That's the simple vav. That's the connection. You can say, well, then what's this business about Yeshua? He, knowing that we completely messed the thing up, we have no clue what's right or wrong, no clue what justice looks like, he shows up and says, hey guys, let me show you the way it works. Let me show you how to love one another. Let me show you how to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. It's in the Ten Commandments. It's very simple. Of course, those who don't want to regard the Ten Commandments as their law, they don't have to pay any attention. The interesting thing is the first word in the Ten Commandments, it says, Anoki, Yahweh Elohecha, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The word Anoki, Aleph, is that something to do with these? Anyway, Aleph, Nun, Kaf, Yod, Anoki, the key at the end means my plumb line. The Kaf Yod is typically translated for, or because, or thus, or therefore. It's a yoking word. It's a vav word, ki, Kaf Yod. Aleph means I will. Nun is to impart or cause, like the lightning bolt, or I will make sure this happens. That's Aleph Nun. I will make sure that the yoke happens accordingly. Thus, therefore, on account of, because. But the word anoch, Aleph Nun Kaf, is the word plumb line. So anochi would be my plumb line. And so when he says, here's the Ten Commandments, Anochi Yahweh Elohecha, I'm Yahweh your Elohim. He's basically saying, this is my plumb line, and it is by this standard that I will make sure that everything you do comes back on you. Multiplied. Nun, multiplied. If you plant one seed and out comes a crop, 30, 60, 100-fold, Yeshua told us all these stories. So he says, here's the way it works, boys. You treat one another with mishpat and zadikah, and you get a multiplication back on your own head of mishpat and zadikah unto blessing and goodness and long life. You treat each other with oppression and violence and thievery and all sorts of grief, and what you get is thievery and violence and all sorts of grief. And you can pray all the prayers you want. It does not change the Vav yoke connection. You're carrying your own yoke. You're causing your own stuff. And you look through Jeremiah, and all of a sudden you see this. He's saying it again and again and again and again, all through the book. Why does the pillaging and the trouble and the diaspora and the Holocaust and the Inquisition and everything else happen to Israel? Because that's what they did to each other. Each man to his neighbor. And it even says, people will say, why did this happen? And the voice will return from the neighbors and other people says, well, because they blew off the covenant of their Elohim. They forsook the covenant. What's about the covenant? Well, here's the point. How do you love Yahweh your Elohim? He says, I am Yahweh. So you know who he is. Here, there's Yod, He, Vav, He. That's who he is. And his name means something. We've gone into that before. He says, you will remember my day, which is the Shabbat. He also says, you will not have any other Elohim in space. The gods of others is one way it's translated. So if you know who he is and you regard his day, and also he says, don't take my name in vain, well, that goes back to who he is. So you've got who, then you've got his name and his day, and he says, don't have anybody else. That's it. There's not really much more to regarding him. And if you look at Leviticus 23, it says, well, it's not just the Shabbat, the day 7, it's also the festivals, which we're observing, because he said to observe them, because that's his preference, because that's the secret key that came out of his mouth that everybody else seems to have lost, hidden, because it was, camouflage, but it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear if you know how to read his words, but they'll tell you, oh, it's camouflage, it was too hard, it was done away with, there's nothing there, don't look. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, pay no attention to the key laying right in plain sight. Then he says, love your neighbors yourself? Well, how do you love your neighbors yourself? Honor your mother and father. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't commit adultery, don't covet your neighbor's stuff. Is that so hard? Here's the thing. He said, these words are so pure, that if you simply keep these words, then the yoke is that what comes upon you is pure blessing. And to the degree that you break these words and weasel and connive and slip around and try to turn and spin and distort and camouflage and excuse and make up new laws to corrupt, the same thing is going to happen to you. Pretty simple. And you can't blame the devil. And you can't blame the enemies. And you can't blame Elohim. Yeshua said an interesting thing at one place. He said, didn't I tell you that you were Elohim? I can't tell you which verse that is in offhand, but I remember it's there. I'm going to show you the word Elohim. You could say, well, the Elohim is translated God, so am I saying that we're gods? People are gods? It goes back to the letters again. Elohim. Aleph, Lamed, He, Yod, Mem. This means power or to cause something to happen. I believe it means to, let me see where I wrote this down here. Aleph Lamed is a motion toward. Hey Yod means here is. Aleph Lamed Hey is to curse or swear. This is a motion toward. Aleph Lamed Hey is to curse or swear. And Hey Yod means here is. Yod Mem is actually the word for waters. You could say chaos like waters, or birthing like waters. Okay, so when he says, didn't I say you're Elohim? What does that mean? He gave humanity, mankind, as the unique, created individual on the face of the earth. So here, look at it this way. Here you have the heavens, and here you have the earth, and the man is the connector in between, the Vav man in between, connecting heaven and earth. What happens in heaven? Whatsoever things you see in heaven are to be loosed on earth are bound and loosed. Didn't he say that regarding Peter? What does that mean? Curse or swear, here it is, in your mouth. How do you bring a curse? Jeremiah, all through there he says, it's real easy, don't do what I say. Don't listen to my words. Don't hearken to my voice. Read Ezekiel 16. It talks about how Yahweh found Jerusalem, a picture of Israel, and how he bought her, cleaned her up, presented her with these beautiful ornaments, which she then, as an unfaithful harlotry laden wife, went and took everything he gave her and gave it to all the other paramours, and he threw her away. But he also talks about bringing her back. My point is, everything works as a boomerang until we get off this planet. Everything is in a sphere, a spiral. It's the word sefer. Samik Pei Resh also is where you get the word sphere, spiral. Everything moves around. We're not stuck in a position of everything is as bad as it's going to get, or it's going to get worse. If you read the book of Jeremiah cautiously, meditatively, and read it, it looks to me like he's saying, it's not too late. If we turn back to his words, he will turn back to us. But we must turn back to his words. If we don't know how to read his words, we don't know how to turn back to his words, because if we can't read, we'll have to go to the clerics, the clerks, the clergy, the ones whose responsibility it is given to them by the governing authorities to tell us what the words say or what they want us to think they say, even if they don't say it because we're too ignorant and too casual to regard it. And Yahweh says concerning His word, if you act casually towards me, I will act casually towards you. If you plug your ears when I speak, I will plug my ears when you scream. He says that in Jeremiah. He says it in Isaiah and Ezekiel and all through the prophets of the Old Testament. On these two hang all the law and the prophets. Here's the law. Love Yahweh by knowing who He is, His character identity incorporated in the alphabetic letters, His name and His day, His festivals. That's not much more to it. And if you say you love Him, express it by loving your neighbor as yourself. Quit the oppression, quit the violence, quit the robbing, thieving, and committing adultery and coveting. That's all it is. And yet we've been told year after year, my whole life, it's too hard, we can't do it, it's impossible, He never intended for us to do it. The only reason He gave us the law was to show us what would happen, because when we tried to keep it, because look what happened to the Jews, that they couldn't keep it. And so He sent Yeshua, who is the embodiment of the law, the Word made flesh. And you know what we did to Him? Here, this is the picture. See this shredded image of a human? Got the most shredded picture of what they did to Yeshua. Because it's what we have done to His Word. Shredded it. As if it was nothing. It was despised. It was rejected. And then we say, oh, please save us. Oh, please help us. He said, you will be saved by returning to my word and valuing it and doing it if you want to be my people. And He then says, is this not what it means to fulfill my desire, that you care for one another and you quit the lying and the stealing and the oppression and the violence financially and physically and mentally and with your governments against each other? This shredding of what we did to Yeshua, we're still doing to one another. And by doing it to one another, we're doing it to His Word. Even now, even if we call ourselves God's country, the Christian nation of the world, we're nothing of the sort. We have a break.